How do you go from YouTube comedy star to slow dancing in the dark fame and still find a way to elevate your career to the next level? Answer: if you're George Miller, or more commonly known as Joji, you release Nectar. My name is Drew, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 18-track work titled Nectar, Joji's sophomore release. Going into this album, I had pretty high expectations for Joji. His first work, In Tongues, an EP, was not particularly special, but his first album, Ballads 1, that released in 2018, has actually showed some really excellent promise and potential and had some really great tracks on it. So moving into Nectar, I was very excited to see what Joji could do next. The question is, could Nectar live up to the hype? Let's jump in with the first two tracks on the album. Nectar opens with Ew and the follow-up track Modus that really set the tone for this work. They both feature these excellent piano melodies, and Joji showing off his higher falsetto range over these beautiful backing string quartets. Ew also has this very sonically jarring dissonance near the bridge and has some heavy reverb that's really reminiscent of Joji's older works, especially In Tongues. I have to give props to Modus here. I'm a huge fan of the production on this track. Everything, every sound, every effect feels so perfectly placed. The next big highlight on the record is Daylight, the collaboration between Joji and Diplo. I think this is easily one of the best tracks on the album. It opens with these huge bass waves and this catchy percussion. It's very much an earworm. Diplo really did a fantastic job on the production here. I'm a big fan of the way the drum fills and the backing vocals create this sonic landscape. And you have Joji with verses and lyrics like Right Now Laying Here Alone is Heaven that showcase just so emotion and such richness in Joji's voice. Moving on, we get to GimMe Love, which was one of the big singles leading up to this album's release. I'm not the biggest fan of this track. I don't think it's that great, or at least the first half of it, but the percussion on it does drive the beat pretty well. But it is around the halfway point that this song really transforms for me. It goes from this super up-tempo pop song to this beautiful acoustic ballad, and you have these incredibly layered vocal harmonies with Joji hitting the top of his vocal range. You have these backing string quartets that just sounds heavenly. And this part of the song also boasts some really rich lyricism and some vivid imagery that's it's an experience to listen to Gimme Love. The next cut on this project was actually the first single, it's Sanctuary. It's a bit of a mixed bag for me. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think the production is well done. It's very clean, and I really like the synth work. Joji's falsettos are as good as ever on this track, but generally it feels very cold. I don't think there's a lot of substance to the track. I think Sanctuary's generally pretty underwhelming to me as far as a lead single goes. Pretty Boy featuring Lil Yachty is actually surprisingly well done. I definitely didn't have high expectations for this track, especially with Lil Yachty's verse. I didn't really think that a lot was going to come of it, but I was quite pleasantly surprised. This one is very clearly a throwback to Miller's roots as Pink Guy on YouTube, and it's got this big booming bass and this catchy hook, and Lil Yachty's verse is actually excellently delivered over some heavy bass synths. Afterthought featuring Benny is this beautiful and soulful R&B track that really strengthens the second half of Nectar. Miller and Benny's vocals blend together perfectly in a calming and almost enchanting way. The chorus on this track is pretty well constructed too. The 14th song on the album, Mr. Hollywood, is where we find Joji at his most romantic. The simplistic love ballad is yet another highlight of Nectar's strong second half, punctuated by these crisp vocal harmonies that are Miller's best since Run. The bass and percussion on this track really stand out to me. There's such an impressive sonic landscape here that it's hard not to like. The cut Like You Do is easily the most emotional track on the album. His vocals and his lyrics here are very expressive of his sadness, of his deep emotion, in a way that's really reminiscent of Slow Dancing in the Dark. Joji's pondering his relationship's inevitable end, singing lyrics like, You're the one I can't lose. No one loves me like you do. Finally, Nectar closes with the upbeat Your Man. Your Man features this simple, sweet synth and this catchy hook that are so clearly Miller's musical calling cards at this point, but my favorite part of the track is around the halfway mark where the production becomes very obvious and the sonic landscape, the atmosphere really start to fit together, and you hear the bass and you hear these backing vocals. It's a fitting end to an excellent LP. Some tracks I really wasn't a big fan of. You've got Reanimator featuring Eve Toomer. It seems very uninspired. The majority of this track is just this musical interlude with a heavy bass line, and when we do get vocals on the track, they're very nondescript and very mediocre, which is not generally trademark Joji. TikTok, the third cut on the album, fails in a similar fashion to Reanimator in that it's got an excellent beat, and I think the beat really points back to Joji's musical history and his growth as a songwriter, but the lyrics are really bland and the vocal delivery is underwhelming to say the best. High Hopes featuring Omar Apollo is rather forgettable as well, and mostly Apollo's verse does nothing to stand out on an album that is so heavy with collaborations and different artists featured on the tracks. My final thoughts and rating are as follows. When you're listening to Nectar after listening to In Tongues and Ballads 1, I think you have to be pleased with how far Joji has come. He's got these clear calling cards on the album with these lo-fi beats and heavy reverb and huge synth waves. And I think this album actually really highlights just how far he's come with his vocal delivery and his vocal performance, especially considering on Joji's older works, that was something he was so hit or miss with. I think the collaborations on this album helped a lot more than they detracted from the value, which is really, really good, especially from a production standpoint with producers like Diplo adding so much. But going into this with Run being one of the big singles, I definitely expected the album to be taken more in a direction with these bigger guitar solos, and a little bit more distortion, and that was not the direction Joji took this album. I'm not unhappy with it, just this was very unexpected. I expected to have these bigger, crunchier guitars with a lot of distortion that are so prevalent on Run, but that's not the album we got. But I am happy with the album that we got. What I'm not happy with are tracks that I've previously mentioned. Reanimator, TikTok, High Hopes, that really seem unfinished or forgettable and underwhelming. When you have an 18-track album like this and you have so much time to put into this, you really want to see stronger overall album tracks when you get away from the singles. You don't want to see these filler tracks, because really that's what they are. Reanimator doesn't add anything to the album. It's just a placeholder. My rating, overall, the album's positives far outweigh the negatives. For me, Nectar is an 8 out of 10. I think that with more focus, more time, and just more development in general, this album absolutely could have been a higher score than 8, but I am happy with the steps Joji is taking to grow. This is an excellent sophomore LP from him. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure and drop a like. If you had something to say, whether positive, negative, or argumentative, I will always accept comments. Drop one in the comment box down below. If you want to hear me review your favorite artist or your favorite album, drop a comment and let me know. The best way to support my channel is subscribing here on YouTube. Ring that bell and it'll let you know when I release another review. But you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook, where I'm active. I put up polls, I put up discussion about upcoming releases and upcoming reviews. Thank you for watching. I'm coming for you, Fantano.